I have already talked about bucket access points, but it was a very high level. Now, in this case, I will go a little bit deeper into bucket access points. So, if we have a bucket, we can create multiple access points of those buckets, and we can actually associate individual IAM policies for individual access points. So, let's say I have this particular bucket and I have three access points created on the same bucket. Now then I have resources, and it can be services running in EC2 instances. Let's say there's a EMR cluster which is running in VPC1, there's an application in VPC1, and there's a Python application in VPC2, and these are the resources. Not only applications, there can be users also. So we can restrict access to buckets using access points to users as well. And we can use either EAR or ERP policies, and in the resource of the policy, we mention the ARN of the access point. The IAM policy for the bucket has to be resource based policy only or bucket policy only. That means we'll have to mention ERP. And this is the bucket policy, and here I'll have to mention the ERP syntax, the effect, action, resource, and principle. And then I'll have to create IAM policy for access points also, and that would also be a resource based or bucket policy. And these are the access point policies. And then finally we'll have to create IAM policies for the applications which are running in VPCs or users using identity based policy, that is ER, not ERP. And these access points would be attached to the resources. It can be users or service roles. So we can create either user policy or service role policy. Now only one bucket policy will not work, because let's say this user wants to access this particular bucket. Now this user should have access to the bucket also, and meaning that the same access that we provide in the access point policy should be there in the bucket policy also. We have to create bucket policy, three different bucket policies for three different access points. So let's see this in action. Now what will I do is that I'll be using the same user, and before that let me go ahead and create access points. I'll be creating two access points for 3IAM Athena dataset bucket. So here I am creating this access point, and the name of the access point is 3IAM Athena dataset read user endpoint. That's the name of the endpoint, by the way. And I can specify a bucket in my account, or I can specify a bucket in another account also. And here of course I'll have to mention the bucket name. This is the bucket that I want to use, and let's select the bucket. Now what will I do is that there are two options. One is network origin. If you are using network origin as VPC, then the applications like EMR, Glue, Python in EC2 would be allowed access to this endpoint. But as I'll be using console, so I'll have to mention internet, because I'll be using AWS user rather than any service. Now access point policy, I'll not mention it right now. Let me keep it as blank and then create the access point. And this is the access point, and I can get the ARN of the access point also. Now click on this, go to properties, and this is the ARN of the access point. Let me go ahead and create one more access point, and this time it will be for write user access point. And again I'll be using the same bucket. Remember, I cannot mention any folder, so I'll have to use the bucket as a whole. And again I'll be using internet, I'll not be using VPC. So if you want to run commands from EC2 instance, you can use VPC network origin. I'll mention internet here, and I'll not attach any policy as of now. And let me go ahead and create this. All right, now first of all, let me remove all the access from this user. So I'm using this S3 read user, and I have this 3IAM read policy. Let me just remove it first, so that this user does not have any access whatsoever. As expected, I do not have permissions to list the buckets using S3 read user. Now let me go to access points, and the problem is I can't even see the access points. It is okay that I don't have access to the bucket, because that is expected. I do not want to give bucket level access. I want to restrict access using access point. So it's fine to have no access at bucket level, but this user should have access to look at the access points. And this is the error. I need to attach a user level identity based policy, and that policy should have this particular action. And the name of the action is list access points. So let us go ahead and create a new policy. I'm just going to use this particular action, and that's it. And in the resource, I'll mention star. Let me create this policy, and I'll attach this policy to this particular user. And this is the policy 3IAM S3 access point list policies. Click on next and add permissions. Now it is done. If I refresh, I should be able to see the access points. So I can see both the access points. Okay, these are the two access points, and let me try to get inside of one of the access points, which is read user access point. And now again, I do not have another permission, which is basically get access point action. So I'll have to add this particular action also in the policy. So I'll just add one more action, and that action is S3 get access point action. So this particular action would give the user access to see what is there in the access point. Alright, so this is done. Now if I refresh, I should be able to see the endpoint and get the access point. Now again, I do not have list bucket. Now why that is the case? So as I told you that even though I provide access to the endpoint, I'll have to give the same access at bucket policy also, right? So I'll have to give list bucket action to the bucket policy. Because it is a read user endpoint, I will only provide read access, not write access. So I'll have to go to the bucket, use the 3IAM Athena dataset, and here I have these permissions. And what will I do here is I will edit the bucket policy. So this is the bucket policy. In the principle, I have added the S3 read user, and in the action I have added just list bucket. That's it. Now let me save the change, and let's go ahead and take a look at the access point. So again, this is the read user access point. So even now I do not have any access. So why do you think that is the case? So I have given bucket level access, I have given list access points, but still I'm not able to see anything. So just pause the video, I can think about it if you can get the answer. So I hope you've got the answer. Now see, I am accessing using the access point, not the bucket directly. So I'll have to give permission, or I'll have to create a bucket policy for the access point also. As you can see, this is the access point and I have a permission here as well. And I did not create any or did not add any policy while creating the access point, because I told you that I'll do it later on. So what I'll do is that I'll go to the access points, and this is the list read user endpoint. Go to permissions, and again this is the access point, by the way, not the bucket. Now I'll have to create a bucket policy or a resource based policy. And this is the policy, as you can see. So the statement ID is again same in every case. So in the principle, I have added S3 read user, and in the action I have added S3 list bucket, and in the resource, instead of the bucket, I have the endpoint. So now if I go to the bucket also, which is 3IAM dataset, and if I look at the permission here and see the bucket policy, is the exact same policy that I have given to the bucket. So in the principle, I have mentioned S3 read user, and then the action I have S3 list bucket, and in resource I have given 3IAM Athena dataset. So it's exactly the same. So the principle is same, action is same. In the resource, instead of the bucket, I'm mentioning the access point, ARN. Now click on save. So now this user should be able to access the endpoint. So let me go back to the endpoint. Now you can see I can actually look at the objects in the 3IAM Athena dataset. Of course, I'll not be able to delete it. Now let me try to delete. I would not have access. because S3 read user does not have delete access to this endpoint. Now what will I do is that I'll create one more user and I will actually edit this write user endpoint. I'll not give access to 3IAM Athena dataset. I'll give access to 3IAM S3 bucket. Okay, so let me just delete this and create a new access point, and the bucket would be 3IAM S3 bucket, not the Athena bucket, and network origin would be internet because I'm not using CLI from EC2. Now this time let me go ahead and provide the access point policy now itself. So I've created a new user S3 write user, and what am I doing here is I am giving list bucket access to this particular user, which is S3 write user on the access point, S3 access point. Now this user should be able to list the bucket or list all the objects in the bucket. So let me go ahead and create the access point. So before going further, let me show you that this write user has 3IAM S3 access point list policy, which has access to list the access points and get the access points also. So now I have logged in using S3 write user, and let me go to S3. I should not be able to see any buckets, by the way. It's similar to S3 read user. So this is the dashboard, and I should not be able to see any buckets, but I should be able to see the access points. And these are the two access points, read user endpoint and write user endpoint. Let me look at read user endpoint. Again, I should not have permission here. And currently I should not have permission to write user endpoint also, because I have not given permission at bucket level, right? So I did add the policy in the access point, but not in the bucket. So what will I do? I will go ahead and add the policy in the bucket. So this is the bucket, and here just edit the bucket policy and allow S3 write user to list bucket, which is 3IAM S3 bucket. Again, it is the exact same policy or exact same permission that I had given to the S3 access point also. The difference being the resource is ARN of the bucket, but there it was ARN of the access point. And let's save the changes. And now I should be able to see the buckets, or basically objects in the buckets, right? So this is the write user endpoint. Okay, the user is still not able to see this. Let's see what is the problem. So this is the endpoint, and I do not see the bucket policy. I did create it, bucket policy for the access point. Again, it is the exact same policy. So S3 write user and the access point ARN, and I'm giving list bucket. So click save. So I hope it has been saved now. Objects, and then look at the permissions. Okay, it has been saved. Now let's refresh in S3 write user, and this time around I should be able to see the objects. So as you can see, I can see the objects. Of course I cannot delete it because I do not have write permission yet. So there's no delete permission. I can't even upload. Let me try to upload a file, and this is the file which I'm trying to upload, and it is giving me error because I do not have any access. Now what I have to do is that I'll have to add put object and delete object action in the access point policy, and I'll have to do the same in the bucket policy also. So this is the access point policy, and I'll edit this, and here I will add /star, and the action should be put object and delete object. That's all. It has to be inside of an array, by the way. I'll have to change the statement ID name. So this is name1 and that should be name2. Alright, so I have added this actions S3 put object and S3 delete object on the access point ARN. So this is the policy, and if you see, this is a little different than what we had mentioned so far. I'm using the endpoint similar to bucket, but instead of just /star, I'm using this /object, which is needed for object endpoint. So now the policy has been saved. Remember this is very important, because what we are doing here is we are giving access at object levels, we'll have to mention access point and object. Object is a keyword here. It's not a folder. So it has been saved now, and I'll have to provide the same access in the bucket level also. So let me go to 3IAM S3 bucket, click on permissions, and here I'll have to edit the bucket policy. I'll have to add put object and delete object action for all the objects in the bucket. And this is the bucket level policy. Again, I'm adding delete object and put object, and instead of endpoint, I'm mentioning the bucket name followed by star. Save changes. So now let me go ahead and try to upload the object again. So this is the right user endpoint, and I'm trying to upload this file. And this time around, I should be able to upload it because there's no issue. The access point has put object access, and I should be able to delete object also. Let me delete this particular retail folder altogether. So it's successfully done. So this is how we can use different access points on the same bucket and on different bucket also. The reason I use the right user endpoint or right user access point for different bucket, because I did not want to make any changes in the Athena dataset bucket. So that's why I had used this right user access point on 3IAM S3 bucket.